Prince William did not deliver his warning quietly behind closed palace doors. He presented it where cameras were already focused, courtiers stood listening, and King Charles could not avoid the consequences. With Camilla standing only a few steps away, the heir insisted that his father decide between safeguarding his wife and safeguarding the crown. What unfolded was far more than a family disagreement. It became a public challenge that threatened to divide the monarchy at its highest level. Before we explore what this truly means for the royal family, be sure to subscribe so you never miss another update. Windsor Castle had been arranged for ceremony, not confrontation. Charles welcomed charity leaders with his usual warmth, while courtiers and members of the press observed every movement. Camilla remained close beside him. William arrived calm but reserved, speaking courteously while carefully watching his father. The reception had been planned to project stability. Any visible crack at that moment could quickly become a national crisis. William waited until the room settled before stepping toward the king. He instructed Charles to remove Camilla from succession planning and sensitive crown decisions or risk losing his support as heir. Succession planning referred to the confidential preparation for how authority, staff, and royal responsibilities would pass to the next sovereign. His message was unmistakable. His father could either protect his wife's influence or protect the monarchy's future, but not both. Charles looked at his son in stunned silence. The king had expected disagreement, but never a public challenge from the man destined to inherit the throne. William kept his voice measured, although the tension in his expression revealed the emotion beneath it. Camilla reached toward a chair but chose not to sit as conversations around the room suddenly faded. The queen consort realized that years of private suspicion had now become a judgment delivered before witnesses. William placed a sealed memorandum on the table. A memorandum is a written document presenting evidence, concerns, and recommended action. Its pages outlined household appointments, access to succession briefings, and efforts by Camilla's office to influence the future structure of the monarchy. Charles did not dismiss it. Instead, he glanced down, quietly asked for the cameras to be moved away, and answered with silence. That hesitation proved more damaging than anger because it suggested the allegations could not easily be denied. Staff members began clearing the room, yet William did not soften his position. He told his father this was neither revenge nor negotiation. Camilla had crossed a boundary weeks earlier. Charles had hidden it, and the prince could no longer accept that silence. To understand why the future king was prepared to confront his own father before the world, it is important to understand the three people standing on opposite sides of that table, not simply as members of the monarchy, but as a husband, a wife, and a son carrying decades of unresolved emotion. Long before William delivered his ultimatum, the three figures at the center of the crisis had already become trapped inside a relationship shaped by love, loyalty, memory, and resentment. Charles viewed Camilla as the woman who had remained beside him through decades of hardship. William viewed her growing influence as a risk his father refused to recognize. And Camilla understood that no matter how far she had risen, one lasting shadow would always stand between her and the heir. Charles depended on her in ways very few people truly understood. Throughout years of criticism, family conflict, and relentless public pressure, Camilla became the person he trusted most whenever confidence faded. She listened when courtiers hesitated, challenged him when others remained silent, and helped him interpret every threat facing the monarchy. To the king, she was far more than a wife. She was the private advisor whose voice he trusted when the outside world felt uncertain. William carried a different responsibility. As heir, he knew he was expected to become the next sovereign, the individual who would one day inherit both the crown and every responsibility attached to it. That duty required him to question decisions that might weaken public confidence, even when those decisions came from his own father. He never viewed resistance as betrayal. He believed it was protection. Later, Charles removed his glasses inside a private withdrawing room. A withdrawing room is a smaller chamber where senior royals speak away from public attention. His hands trembled as he placed William's memorandum beside him and quietly asked why his son had chosen public humiliation instead of making one final private appeal. Although the king's voice remained calm, the pain beneath it could not be hidden. William never looked away. He answered that private appeals had already failed. Every warning had been softened, delayed, or ignored whenever Camilla's position was involved. For years, he had watched Charles defend her, even when that defense widened the distance between father and son. The old wounds had never truly disappeared. They had only remained hidden beneath duty. Elsewhere inside Windsor Castle, Camilla prepared for the coming battle. She unlocked a private drawer and removed copies of correspondence exchanged between her office and senior household officials. Those letters revealed that she had expected resistance and had quietly gathered documents to defend her position. She was worried, but she was not surprised. Charles himself had received a warning only days earlier. A senior courtier had informed him through an official briefing that William was considering a formal intervention. The king dismissed the warning, convinced his son would never challenge him publicly. That single mistake allowed the crisis to explode. The public confrontation at Windsor had been building for years, but the final fracture began during one confidential rehearsal when Camilla reached for authority William believed she should never possess. Every royal conflict reaches a moment that later feels unavoidable, the instant when patience ends and private suspicion becomes certainty. For William, that moment arrived during a confidential succession rehearsal at Buckingham Palace. What should have been a routine discussion about continuity instead became a struggle over who would shape the monarchy after Charles. One sentence spoken by Camilla transformed the atmosphere. One silent response from the king transformed William's trust. From that moment forward, nothing between them would ever be the same. 3 weeks before the confrontation at Windsor, Charles entered a restricted meeting with his son, his wife, the private secretary, and 2 constitutional advisers. A succession rehearsal was a confidential exercise created to prepare the monarchy for a sovereign's temporary incapacity or an unexpected transfer of royal authority. Every decision discussed there mattered because it could determine who controlled staff, information, and public responsibilities during the most delicate period of a reign. William expected the discussion to remain between the monarch, the heir, and the officials carrying formal responsibility. His expression shifted the moment Camilla entered carrying a marked briefing folder and took a seat directly beside the king. The queen consort had not come simply to observe. She had arrived ready to influence what would happen after Charles could no longer exercise full authority. Camilla waited until the advisers raised the possibility of a regency, an arrangement allowing another royal to perform the sovereign's duties when the monarch is unable to do so. She then stated that her office should retain a formal advisory role in household appointments and official communications after William assumed control. Sliding a proposed protocol covered with handwritten revisions across the table, she calmly presented her position. William read the opening page without speaking. The proposal did far more than protect ceremonial appearances. It would have allowed her advisers to receive selected briefings, influence staff transitions, and help shape how Charles's reign would be presented after a future accession, the formal moment when a new monarch takes the throne. The prince slowly looked toward his father, waiting for one clear rejection. Charles lowered his eyes and quietly replied that every option deserved consideration. That single sentence struck William harder than any argument. To him, it sounded like surrender. He saw a father unwilling to restrain his wife, even when her request entered the territory of his son's future reign. The advisers eventually left the room, but the tension remained. William asked Camilla directly whether she was attempting to build a court within his future court. She answered that she was protecting Charles's legacy from those who had never accepted her and who would erase everything they had built together. Without signing it, William pushed the amended protocol back across the table. Camilla stopped the pages with 2 fingers while Charles remained seated between them, unable, or unwilling, to defend either side. That same evening, the future king instructed his team to gather every recorded instance in which Camilla's office had become involved in succession matters. Those findings later became the memorandum he placed before his father. The rehearsal exposed the conflict, but it did not resolve it. When William realized that private resistance could simply be absorbed and forgotten, he chose a confrontation his father would never be able to hide. Once the reception hall had emptied, the formal language disappeared. There were no cheering crowds, no prepared remarks, and no ceremonial smiles. Only Charles, William, and Camilla remained inside a smaller room with the door firmly closed. The king demanded loyalty. His son demanded accountability. Then Camilla spoke, and the disagreement became far more dangerous than a dispute over royal authority. It became a reckoning with the family's deepest and most painful history. Charles directed both of them into the green drawing room while aides remained outside. The room was reserved for private royal discussions away from public ceremonies, yet nothing about this meeting felt calm or controlled. He placed William's sealed memorandum on a nearby table and refused to open it. No written document, he insisted, could justify the humiliation his son had caused before cameras and witnesses. William refused to step back. He repeated that Camilla must be removed from succession planning, future household appointments, and confidential discussions concerning his eventual reign. Those appointments referred to the senior positions that would shape the next sovereign's court and day-to-day authority. Until Charles accepted those limits, the prince declared he would withdraw from every joint strategic meeting with his father. Charles shoved a chair aside with sudden force. He accused his son of placing the woman he loved on trial because of wounds inherited from the past. The king insisted he would never allow his marriage to become the target of judgment by his own child. Nor would he permit decades of loyalty to be reduced to a collection of accusations. For the first time, William's voice briefly faltered. He answered that love did not create constitutional authority. The future king explained that he had spent years avoiding a confrontation capable of reopening old scars. But silence had become more dangerous than conflict. Every private warning had failed. Every boundary had been treated as temporary. At last, Camilla spoke. She admitted that the proposed amendments had originated within her office and had been included in the marked protocol presented during the rehearsal. The Queen Consort argued that Charles's achievements could easily be erased after his reign, and that she wanted only enough influence to protect both his legacy and her own place from disappearing overnight. Then William revealed something she had never expected. Notes from a documented staff meeting showed one of her aides discussing ways key communications could remain under Camilla's influence after an accession, the formal moment when a new monarch assumes the throne. Her expression changed instantly. She realized the prince had uncovered not only the official proposal, but also the private strategy behind it. William opened the memorandum to its final page. 2 prepared statements were waiting. One limited Camilla's role while preserving cooperation with the heir. The other defended her continued involvement and accepted a permanent rupture between father and son. Charles slowly lifted the pen. He held it over the first statement, then quietly placed it back on the table without signing. Camilla watched his hand. William watched his face. The entire crisis had now been reduced to a single choice. Yet the real power did not belong only to the man holding the pen. It belonged to those controlling access, continuity, and the machinery surrounding the crown. A monarch may wear the crown, but no modern reign survives through personal will alone. Behind Charles stood private secretaries, legal advisors, communications teams, and household officials whose cooperation transformed royal decisions into reality. William understood that machinery because he was destined to inherit it. Camilla understood it because she had spent years learning how it worked behind closed doors. Now every quiet instruction, cancelled meeting, and unopened file became another piece of the battle. Charles could defend his wife with all the devotion of a loving husband. But he could not force his son to cooperate willingly. Succession planning was the long-term preparation for transferring authority, staff, and royal duties from one reign to the next. Without William's confidence, that process would appear divided. And any visible split between sovereign and heir could weaken public trust in the future of the monarchy. Palace loyalties divided almost immediately. Some officials remained firmly committed to the king's present authority. Others believed their responsibility was to protect the next reign before the transition even began. A third group had worked alongside Camilla for years and viewed any attempt to reduce her influence as an attack on the woman they had helped establish beside Charles. The private secretary entered to collect the unsigned statements and found Charles sitting alone. His shoulders had dropped, and his eyes remained fixed on William's memorandum. The official had watched the king command rooms filled with powerful figures. Yet now he looked less like a monarch and more like a father frightened that his son might walk away forever. The papers were gathered quietly, because everyone understood one painful truth. Royal authority meant very little if the family at its center no longer trusted one another. William faced pressure as well. One senior advisor urged him to approve a public statement describing the confrontation as nothing more than a misunderstanding. The prince refused. He explained that gentle language would only allow the same interference to continue while forcing everyone to pretend trust still existed. That decision mattered because a single reassuring sentence could have restored calm outside the palace while hiding the deeper problem within it. Hours later, the legal briefing arrived. Constitutional advisors concluded in an official report that Camilla held no independent authority to shape the household of the next reign. The royal household referred to the network of officials and staff supporting the working monarch. Any future role for her would depend entirely upon William's approval. That meant the proposed protocol could never survive an accession without his consent. Palace officials then warned Charles that defending Camilla without clear limits would make the crisis appear to be constitutional overreach rather than a private family disagreement. Public sympathy, they cautioned, could shift toward the heir if the king appeared unwilling to protect established institutional boundaries. At last, Charles acted. He instructed that Camilla's office be temporarily removed from all succession-related communications, while he considered a permanent resolution. An aide personally delivered the written restriction to her private sitting room. She read the opening paragraph twice, then carefully folded the document and quietly asked whether her husband had personally approved it. When the aide answered yes, the queen consort slowly turned away without saying a single word. The first restriction had now been imposed. Although the language described it as temporary, its meaning could not be softened. Camilla had already begun losing access. William had demonstrated the influence he possessed, and Charles was about to witness the consequences unfolding inside his own household. By the following morning, the monarchy still appeared stable from the outside. Inside the palace, however, everything had changed. Meetings were cancelled. Briefing folders were redirected. Staff members fell silent whenever Camilla entered corridors she had once walked through with complete confidence. William had forced the institution to establish a clear boundary. Yet victory brought him no satisfaction. Charles felt abandoned. Camilla felt stripped of respect. And the future king slowly realized the emotional cost of achieving what he believed was necessary. Camilla's representatives failed to appear at 2 scheduled planning meetings before breakfast. Documents concerning the future household were redirected to William's team, placing decisions about the next reign beyond her reach. The royal household referred to the network of advisors, officials, and employees who supported the sovereign's work. On paper, these changes looked purely administrative. Inside the palace, however, they carried a far harsher message. Her influence was being removed piece by piece. Charles watched the public schedule begin to unravel. A planned engagement involving himself, his wife, and his son was divided into 2 separate appearances, preventing another confrontation while allowing officials to describe the change as routine. The king understood why distance had become necessary. Yet he also knew the revised schedule would convince many that something serious had taken place. Camilla walked into her office and immediately stopped. The briefing box that normally waited on her desk had disappeared. She asked her secretary who had ordered its removal, listened quietly to the answer, then closed the door without another word. A briefing box was a secure container used to deliver official papers to senior royals. Losing access meant far more than losing documents. It meant the palace no longer trusted her presence within its most sensitive decisions. Before midday, Charles telephoned William. He accused his son of creating fear among loyal staff and turning years of faithful service into suspicion. William calmly replied that those people were unsettled because informal influence had finally been exposed, not because he had created the problem. Neither man raised his voice for long. Yet every sentence pushed them farther apart. Soon afterward, Camilla confronted her husband. According to a private recorded conversation preserved in a palisades written account, she warned Charles that she would withdraw from upcoming public duties if William's restrictions became permanent. The queen consort refused to stand beside the king as a symbol of unity while being treated as a threat behind closed doors. Her warning left Charles trapped between 2 impossible choices. He could reverse course and risk losing his heir, or accept the gradual withdrawal of the woman he had defended for decades. William found no satisfaction in any of it. Late that night, Catherine discovered him sitting alone, reading the memorandum once again. The confidence he had displayed at Windsor had been replaced by exhaustion. He admitted that he had expected anger, but never imagined he would feel as though he had personally destroyed what remained of his father's happiness. Catherine did not excuse the way he had acted publicly. She quietly reminded him that documents and ultimatums had reached their limit. William closed the folder and rested both hands against the table, as she explained that protecting the crown would mean very little if he could no longer speak honestly with the man wearing it. The machinery of the palace had enforced William's boundary. But only one private conversation still had the power to decide whether that boundary would preserve the monarchy, or permanently damage the family at its heart. That same night, William returned to Windsor alone.
No advisors.
No documents.
No cameras.
Charles waited inside a small library where the fire had nearly burned out. For the first time since the crisis began, neither man stood behind his royal title. The king was simply a father afraid of losing his son. The prince was simply a son exhausted from carrying years of unspoken resentment. The conversation they were about to have would determine whether the crown demanded sacrifice. or reconciliation. William requested to meet his father alone. No private secretaries entered the room. No official notes were recorded. Camilla remained elsewhere inside the castle. Private secretaries are senior officials responsible for managing royal decisions, schedules, and official communication. Without them present, there would be no carefully prepared record and no institutional protection. Every word spoken would belong only to a father and his son. William broke the silence first. He explained that he had never intended to remove Camilla from Charles's life, diminish her charitable work, or question the loyalty she had shown throughout his reign. His concern, he said, was much narrower, but far more significant. Personal devotion had gradually begun influencing decisions that could shape the next sovereign's reign before it had even begun. The prince could accept Camilla's place beside his father. He could not accept her authority within his future court. Charles listened carefully, yet the hurt remained visible. He admitted that the public ultimatum had made him feel as though his own son had never accepted his happiness. The king quietly asked whether this struggle truly centered on constitutional boundaries, or whether William was using duty to punish him for a family history neither of them had ever fully overcome. William did not avoid the question. He admitted that the past had shaped much of his distrust and that old wounds had influenced the way he viewed Camilla. Even so, he insisted that the succession protocol, not memory alone, had forced him to act. The document would have carried her influence directly into his future reign without his approval. He then apologized for confronting Charles before cameras and witnesses. The boundary itself had been necessary, he said, but making that demand publicly had been unnecessarily painful. At last, Charles shared something his son had never fully understood. During their private conversation, the king explained that Camilla feared becoming powerless and forgotten the moment his reign came to an end. Her attempt to preserve influence had grown from fear that the palace would erase her as soon as he was gone, not from a desire to rule through William. The prince quietly offered another solution. Camilla would retain her dignity, her residence, her security, her charitable responsibilities, and an honored ceremonial position. A ceremonial role meant continuing public appearances and royal honors without authority over government or palace administration. She would hold no influence over succession planning, future appointments, or the management of William's reign. Charles remained silent for several moments. Then he nodded. He agreed to issue the decision in his own name, not as his son's victory, nor as his wife's defeat, but as the necessary line separating marriage from monarchy. Slowly, Charles extended his hand across the room. William looked at it for only a moment, then stepped forward and embraced his father instead. The conflict had not disappeared, but their relationship had survived it. Father and son had finally spoken the words they could never have said before the cameras. The monarchy, however, still owed the public an explanation. And beyond the palace walls, the nation had already begun reaching its own conclusions. By dawn, the confrontation no longer belonged only to Windsor. It had become a national story. Broadcasters repeatedly aired the moment William placed the memorandum before his father. Newspapers transformed a private family dispute into a nationwide debate about loyalty, marriage, and constitutional duty. Outside the palace gates, some defended Charles's right to stand beside his wife. Others praised William for protecting the future of the monarchy. The royal family had survived private scandals before, but rarely had Britain witnessed the institution's internal boundaries being drawn so openly. Buckingham Palace released its official statement before the morning news broadcasts had ended. Camilla would continue supporting Charles through public engagements and charitable responsibilities. However, she would hold no formal role in succession planning, future household appointments, or decisions concerning William's eventual reign. Succession planning referred to the confidential preparation for transferring royal duties and authority from one sovereign to the next. The wording protected her dignity while confirming that the future king had secured the boundary he demanded. Broadcasters described the agreement as a victory for constitutional clarity. At the same time, many questioned the damage caused by William's public approach. Some commentators praised his determination. Others criticized his impatience. The debate mattered because public confidence depended not only on present stability, but also on trust in the next reign. And Britain had now witnessed those two priorities collide. Charles watched the television coverage with the sound muted. The same images of William placing the memorandum before him continued to replay across the screen. The official statement had protected the institution. But it had also revealed the deepest weakness within his own family. He had kept his wife beside him, while acknowledging that his son had been right to limit her influence. Camilla received the morning newspaper from an aide. Across the front page appeared the headline, "The Crown Before the Queen." Beneath it stood an image of William facing Charles while she remained just behind them. Without speaking, the Queen Consort turned the newspaper face down and instructed her assistant to continue with the day's engagements. She refused to let humiliation become surrender. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered behind the barriers. One supporter held a handwritten sign that read, "A king loves, an heir protects." Television cameras captured two elderly women arguing passionately over the crisis, only to embrace moments later after admitting they understood both perspectives. That brief exchange reflected the country's divided emotions more clearly than any official statement ever could. William showed no sign of celebration. During a public engagement, a broadcaster asked whether he viewed the outcome as a victory. The prince calmly replied that every generation carried the responsibility to protect both the dignity of the family and the responsibilities of the crown. His answer shifted the focus away from triumph and toward reconciliation. Soon afterward, Charles arranged for himself, Camilla, and William to attend the next major royal ceremony together. Camilla stepped from the vehicle first. William approached quietly, extended his hand, and waited until she accepted it before turning toward his father. The gesture was formal, measured, and deliberate. The nation had witnessed the conflict. It had witnessed the compromise. Now, one final moment would determine what the entire crisis truly meant, not only for royal authority, but for the personal cost of protecting the crown. Charles ultimately made the decision William had demanded. Yet the truth proved far more complicated than a husband abandoning his wife or a king yielding to his heir. He chose to separate Camilla's place in his heart from her place within the machinery of succession. William secured the constitutional boundary he believed the monarchy required. Camilla retained her dignity, but lost the influence she had hoped to preserve. The crown endured because all three accepted a painful compromise. Charles formally approved a permanent protocol preventing Camilla and her private office from participating in succession planning, appointments for the future reign, regency discussions, and communications reserved exclusively for the sovereign and the heir. A regency is the legal arrangement allowing another royal to carry out the monarch's duties if the sovereign becomes unable to serve. The settlement closed every avenue through which her influence might have extended into William's future reign. Camilla did not lose everything. She retained her title, her residence, her security, her charitable commitments, her public engagements, and her ceremonial precedence beside the king. Ceremonial precedence refers to the official order determining where senior royals stand and appear during state occasions. She remained beside Charles as queen consort, but her authority ended where the future king's responsibility began. Charles accepted the sacrifice with quiet sorrow. He finally realized that protecting his marriage did not require giving his wife influence over the next reign. Love could shape his private life, support him through difficult moments, and define the bond they shared. But it could never erase the constitutional boundary separating one sovereign from the next. The king surrendered denial, yet preserved the woman he loved. William carried regrets of his own. During a private conversation documented in a written palace account, he admitted that the public ultimatum had caused unnecessary humiliation. He never withdrew his demand because he still believed the boundary was essential. However, he promised his father that any future disagreement would begin behind closed doors rather than before cameras. Later, Camilla met privately with William. She told him he had judged her harshly, but accepted that the future crown belonged to him. The queen consort asked only that he never mistake her fear of being forgotten for a desire to rule as sovereign in everything but name. Her words were not surrender. They were acceptance. William assured her that her place in Charles's life would never be challenged. But he also made one principle unmistakably clear.
No spouse, no advisor,
And no courtier would ever shape authority within his future reign before he himself became king. Camilla accepted that distinction without further argument. The confrontation had transformed all three of them. Charles surrendered denial. Camilla surrendered future influence. William surrendered the belief that doing what felt necessary would also feel like victory. At the conclusion of the ceremony, the king walked between his wife and his son. Camilla's arm remained linked with Charles, while William matched his father's pace on the opposite side. They had all been wounded, yet they remained united by a boundary each had finally accepted. Together, they came to understand one difficult truth. The crown had been protected, without abandoning love, and that painful balance became the true measure of their duty. Charles remained a devoted husband. Camilla remained his queen. William remained his heir. And the monarchy moved forward intact. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and join us again for the next update.